Gururdevo Maheshwaraha Gurureva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Tvameva Mata Cha Pita Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Vedya Dravinam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavamahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So welcome to our first Gita class of the new year. So we are in chapter 3, and we just started the first verses before we broke for the holidays. So where we are in our story, at the end of chapter 2, the yoga of knowledge. Krishna has extolled the science of self-knowledge and what it's like to be a person of steady wisdom, the Sthita Prajna Purusha, and this wonderful, wonderful abidance in the self. And at the beginning of chapter 3, Arjuna's got a huge doubt. And he says, now, wait a minute. You've been talking about this yoga of knowledge. Why are you telling me to act and to fight this fight? And the best way to understand that is to go back to something he said earlier, which is two paths approach a person, the path of knowledge and the path of action. But it's very hard for the embodied to take the path of knowledge. And what he means here is when we're ego identified. He says, for them, for us, passive action is better. So what he's implying here, and what we want to understand, is there's a sequence of practice. The way I like to explain it, because I love to cook, is if you have a very ripe tomato and you have a dull knife, if you try to cut the tomato with the dull knife, it's going to squish. So there's a preparatory practice, it's called knife sharpening. You sharpen the knife. But sharpening the knife in and of itself is only preparatory. Then you've got to slice the tomato. Likewise, how do we rediscover our self-nature? It is through discrimination, viveka, vairagya, intense dispassion, inquiry into our self-nature in a sattvic mind, a mind made very pure. But most of us do not have a sattvic temperament. Most of us have difficulty discriminating, and most of us are solidly identified with a personal sense of self. So for us, the scriptures give us a bunch of different preparatory practices. And karma yoga is one of them. Why? Because even though we would like to have this intense renunciation of the phenomenal world and our attachments to it, Krishna has said everybody's impelled into action helplessly by the force of Prakriti, by the force of nature. What can restraint do? So we find ourselves, we may have these ideals, but there we are, striving, reacting, becoming identified, doing all the things that people in ignorance do. But we can't stop ourselves, even though we know the foolishness of it. So we are ripe for karma yoga. And here Gita gives us what I've distilled into 5 elements. The first, act. You are not going to find freedom by refraining from action. The highest state is not sitting in a corner all blissed out. No one can avoid action. Krishna has said even maintenance of the body is not possible without action. Eventually, you're going to go to the bathroom and you're going to go to the kitchen. You're going to go to the bedroom and sleep. You're going to act. Action in and of itself is not problematic. How should we act? Number 2, according to our swabharabha, our inherent latent proclivities. Each of us has within us a sense of mission, vocation, calling. Where we are in our lives, our duties and our desires. Wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to renounce our desires. Hold on. We act according to our nature in the beginning. Krishna has said the person who gets rid of the objects of desire but allows the desire to remain behind is verily a hypocrite. So we act. How? According to our inherent latent proclivities, according to our vasanas. But, third element, in the yajna spirit, in the spirit of sacrifice. And we've talked about how the Vedic sacrifice is a metaphor here. And we've talked about the deeper meaning of the term deva. Deva is a god or a demigod. But from the standpoint of our yoga, the devas are the presiding principles governing the field of human endeavor. So if you're an IT person, or you're an attorney, or you're a doctor, or you're a janitor, or you're a mother, or whatever it is that is your particular activity in life, what we want to do is serve that principle rather than engaging in the world simply for the paycheck, simply for the status, simply for the esteem of others. So we make everything yajna, a sacrifice. Swamiji would thunder, serve the society, serve something greater than our own ego needs. I was talking with a student today who's a singer, and she was visiting with a family member, and they were watching a bunch of singing competitions. And, that's kind of nuts to me, because it's all about who's better than the next person and getting an award or a prize and stuff like that. What my suggestion is work hard to be the best singer you can be, but serve the music God, not the ambition God. And how can you give your talent to the world? I'm not seeing anybody's face online. Am I still hooked in? Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, third element, act in the yajna spirit. Again, I used to talk about back when I was a teacher. When I was a music teacher, I would teach voice. And one of the questions I would ask the young people I would be working with is, do you want to be a celebrity or do you want to be a musician? They are not the same thing. And if they would come to me and in their mind they wanted to be a star, very normal kind of reaction. But later on, Krishna's going to say, I'm the giver of the fruits of action, the karma paladata. Not everybody gets to be a star, but you can enjoy making music and work at it. You can be a working professional. Not everybody gets to sing at the Metropolitan. Fourth element, we're going to get to that. Renouncing our attachment to the fruits of action. Thy right is to the work, never to its fruits. So whatever you invest your time and energy into in the world, you never know how it's going to turn out. So you better enjoy what you're doing. So I have a student who for 25 years owned a restaurant, owned two of them actually. She's lost them both because of the COVID economic downturn. She's being a good yogi. She's been able to let it go and move on. The fifth element is renouncing our identification with a sense of agency. And that's much more difficult. We'll get to that. So that's kind of a summary of what we're going to be dealing with. Deepa, what verse are we on tonight?
Jim, I can't exactly remember if we did 12 or not. But
let's do it again.
Okay. Ishtan bhogan hi vo deva dasyante yakya bhavitaha terdattana pradayebhyo yo bhungte stena eva saha. The devas, nourished by the sacrifice, will give you the desired objects. Indeed, he who enjoys objects given by the devas without offering to them is verily a thief.
Yes. So again, here, the exoteric understanding is when you are doing a ritual, you offer the oblation to the god, and we get the remnant of the sacrifice. So the easiest way to see that in some homes, many Hindu homes, mummy will cook dinner, and then she takes a thali of food and she takes it over to the mandir, the god, puts it there in front of the god, then she serves the food. So the idea is the god gets to eat first. So we actually, in that paradigm, we're cooking for the god. We get leftovers. So how does that translate into this understanding of karma yoga? So in whatever work that you're doing, serve the principle. So for example, if you're a doctor, if your focus is just on how many patients can I get in a day, how much money can I make, how many operations can I do, I own part of a drug company, how many drugs can I prescribe, then you're not really thinking about healing, and you're not really thinking about the good of your patient. So Krishna is saying, for this kind of person, focus on serving the healing God. Focus on serving the patient in front of you. The money will come. And it's the same in every field of endeavor. But if you're in it just for the buck, just for the status, he says you verily are going to eat sin, meaning it increases our egocentricity. It alienates us from the work in the end. And it's not a skillful way to approach our activity. Anybody have any thoughts on this before we move on? We had quite a few questions about this before we quit for the year.
Jim, I had a question.
Who's that? Give me your name because I can't see who it is.
This is Divya, sorry.
All right.
I was curious because one of the talks you gave, you talked about in some professions, it's important to have ambition because that's what the profession requires you to have. So I'm intrigued by this idea that you also said, like, well, hopefully you're not doing it for the money or the fame, when in some professions, if you don't go for that, then maybe you're not going to be, I'm giving an example, businessman, businesswoman. I'm curious how you reconcile that.
Okay, so let's talk about this. So let's say that you are purchasing a corporation, and you purchase the corporation, and your goal is to drain all the resources out of that corporation and then bankrupt it and dump it. That's contrary to what Krishna is saying. If your goal is to be disaffected from the business, and all you want is the money. But that's very different than I just found out this year. Warren Buffett owns See's Candies. He bought it back in the 70s because he loves See's Candies. He invested $5 million back in the 70s into See's Candies. Now, he did all the things he does as an expert businessman. See's Candies is worth $1 billion now. But he did it because he loved the product and he was serving the business god. He wanted to make See's Candy a successful corporation. And as a result, he's punching coupons. He's making a lot of money. But that's a very different strategy than the people who are robber barons in business. Can you see the distinction, Divya?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you say is ambition is fine as long as it's aligned with overall providing benefit and good.
Yes, serve something greater than your own ego. And if you are an ambitious business person, by all means be ambitious. Now take that proclivity and serve. There's nothing wrong with the ambition. You can't pretend you're not ambitious. But are you in a business just for the buck? And are you doing damage to the society or the company just so you can scrape off the money? Now, one of the things this will help us avoid, one of the problems we have in our culture, is false production and consumption. I can remember, God, we're going back probably 30, 40 years. Someone came up with the idea of a pet rock. So they found rocks and they painted little faces and stuff on them, put them in nice little packages and sold them. They made a heck of a lot of money. But they serve no real need in the society. And all they do is create false needs in customers. So part of what you want to do if you're in business, find a product that in fact is doing good. It's not hard. A whole lot of needs out there. But you don't want to have an alienation from your work just for the sake of the money. Here's another way in which people get into trouble. So there are many people who go into government service. Do you know how a government job is like a broken rifle? It won't work and you can't fire it. So there are people who are tamasic in their approach towards work. Their idea of a good job is I want it to be secure, where I don't have to work, where I can screw around all the time, where I can take extra long lunches, and they can't fire me, and if they try, I'll have a suit. And that's so adharmic of a way to approach your work life. I mean, it not only screws up whatever government bureau you're working for, but it's soul crushing. Does that make sense, Divya?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before we go on? Next verse.
Sure.
You there, Deepa?
Yeah, I'm just a little
Okay.
rusty with my controls and sharing the screen.
You're doing wonderfully. Thank you.
All right. Yagya Shishtashina Santo Muchyante Sarva Kilbishahe Bhunjate Te Tvagham Papa Ye Pachantyatma Karanat. The righteous who eat the remnants of the sacrifices are freed from all sins, but those sinful ones who cook food only for their own sake verily eat but sin.
Yes. So we are introduced to a technical word, papam, which means sin. Very different than the Judeo-Christian idea, which is, you have 613 kosher laws in the Old Testament, and if you break one of those, then God's a cosmic traffic cop and you're going to be punished. Let's look at these two words, papam, demerit or sin, punya, merit. And here's the yogic definition of them. Punya, or merit, is any activity that we engage in, gross, meaning it's a physical action, or subtle, meaning it's a mental activity, that has as its result further quiescence of mind. Papam is an activity that we engage in, either gross physical activity or subtle mental activity, which has as its result a further grossification of my mind. So, for example, someone may, well, let's talk about a real life experience. We go back to 2008, when all the people in the banks were selling junk mortgages to people. They knew that these people couldn't ever meet the balloon payments and make these mortgage payments. They didn't want to get stuck holding the debt, so they bundled it and sold it. So all of that is papam, that's sin. They're doing it for the money. They don't care about the poor people they sold these junk mortgages to. They didn't care about what was happening to the banking industry because of these bundling of junk mortgages. And in fact, when everything was about ready to crash, many of them sold short. They were betting on everything crashing and walked away with millions. Now, some people would say they were smart. Yoga would say those are great stains on their souls. Great grossification of their minds. We may think we don't have a conscience, but we all do, because at the deepest level, we're all one. Something as simple. If you go to a store, buy something, and the clerk gives you too much change back, if in your greed you think, oh, look at me, I got away with it. They gave me a 20 instead of a 10. That will leave a mark on your psyche. That's papam. That's what a sin is. It will grossify your mind. These little pieces of guilt and shame will pile up. And then we wonder why so many people need to do drugs, take anxiety medication, get drunk, to deal with all these internal conflicts. So punya is when we're acting in the world. Now, what is it that he's specifically talking about here? If a person is working in the world with no sense of integrity, no sense of a sacrifice to serve people or to serve the society, all you want is the money. This will grossify your mind. You may get a temporary buzz. Look at all the money I made. But Krishna's saying in the long run, this is likely to cause you suffering. But a righteous person, this person who understands this principle, the end is the means in a different form. All you have to do is keep acting in the world in an ethical way, with integrity, with a sense of generosity, with a seva attitude. And I promise you, the universe will take care of you. It'll all work out. Any thoughts about this? Next verse.
The next two verses are together, Jim. So it's
All right.
15. Annad bhavanti bhutani पर्जन्यादन्न संभवः यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञ कर्म समुद्भवः कर्म ब्रह्मोद्भवं विद्धि ब्रह्माक्षर समुद्भवम् तस्मात् सर्वगतं ब्रह्म नित्यं यज्ञे प्रतिष्ठितम्. From food come forth beings. From rain, food is produced. From sacrifice arises rain, and sacrifice is born of action. Know you that action comes from Brahmaji, the creator, and Brahmaji comes from the imperishable. Therefore, the all-pervading Brahman, God principle, ever rests in sacrifice.
So the exoteric meaning of this has to do with this idea that those who are Brahmins, who are enjoined by the caste requirements, will do sacrifices for the purpose of keeping the cosmic order in place. So let's look at this exoteric order. So the first idea, what's the first one?
From food come forth beings.
So everybody comes into being because of food. From food, every being lives. And what's interesting, in the end, life lives on life. You may not be eating steak, but you're eating a tomato. So all of us need food in order to survive. And where does the food come from?
From rain, food is produced.
Yes. So the ancients didn't quite understand the whole process of genetics and stuff like that. The idea was when the rains came, then the crops would grow. So the cause of the production of the food was rain. Where does the rain come from?
From sacrifice arises rain.
Yes. So the idea here is these Vedic sacrifices are what cause the cosmic order to work, meaning that's where the rain comes from. Next idea.
And sacrifice is born of action.
Yes. So someone has to act, to do the ritual in order to perform the yajna, the puja, which then causes the gods to be able to function. Here, the devas mean also the presiding principles over the forces of nature. So the ancient idea was that through sacrifice, you could control the forces of nature here. And this is the outer meaning that we're talking about. We'll go into the inner meaning in a minute. Next idea.
Know you that action comes from Brahmaji.
So in the end, the creator has created beings, created humans to act. And it is through action that the whole cosmic order is kept in place. So now let's look at the inner meaning in terms of our karma yoga. So let's take it in reverse. So we are made to act. Brahmaji has created, that's the same as Ishvara, the creator God. We're made to act. That's what a human being is someone who acts. And so the result of our actions is that we produce stuff. Here's the deeper meaning of the rain. So on that level, if I go to work and I'm a musician, and so like when I had my church job, my job was to propitiate the church music God. My job was to serve the community that I worked for. My job was to serve the muse, the music muse. My job was to serve and teach my choir members. That was the action. And what it produced was the beautiful music, the rain. From that came the food, meaning people enjoyed the services, they enjoyed the music, and I got a paycheck. And from that, everybody's nourished. You see, that's the idea. So the underlying principle that he's talking about is you cannot escape the fact that you're made to work. You're made to create. Now, let's look at something many of us might idealize. What about these rich trust fund kids? You know, they've got rich parents or rich grandparents, and they live on $15 million a year. And all they do is run around the world and go to fancy beaches and drive fast cars and do cocaine and all that kind of stuff. My experience is that's a very unsatisfying way of life. And we have stories in the newspapers of how kids like that who are only living to satisfy their pleasure needs. They're eating food for their own use. They're cooking food for their own use. Are very miserable and unhappy people. Then antithetically, there are people who come from enormous wealth, but who are raised with the family values of you come from great privilege. You have a duty to serve. And we find families who do that, the Bush families. You may not agree with their politics, but they are raised to serve. The Kennedys, very definitely. They don't work for money. They work to make a contribution to the society. You look at someone like Bill Gates, made billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. What's he doing with it now? Trying to make a difference in the world. So it's not the presence or absence of wealth is not the issue here. It's our attitude towards the world. We've got a job to do, all of us, to serve. Any thoughts on this?
Hey,
Next
Jim,
verse.
It's
Go
Fang.
ahead.
Sorry, Jim. A question on this, which is,
Is this Fang?
Yes. Hey, Jim. It is. I've got a question on this, which may
Sure.
not be a great question, but let's say, for example, that like there's so many things that are wrong with the world, right? Like maybe that's too judgmental, but there's just so much that one wants that it's just like so much injustice in so many sectors. I suppose the question is, how do you choose to focus on just one thing? Because you only have a limited amount of time to fix, maybe, or hopefully contribute to one area.
Well, what you do is you work with what you've got. So, for example, what is your professional training? What do you do?
Well, I've done a number of different things. I worked in financial services a lot, but it's not what I enjoy doing.
Well, but if that's your training in financial services, The idea, we used to say back in my old activism days, you think globally, but you act locally. What can you do with the skill set that you have? So if your skill set is financial services, you can take those skills and serve the society. Now, you're never going to find the perfect job. It just isn't out there. There's always people. There's always areas of gray. I mean, look at poor Arjuna. He not only has to fight his cousins, but he's got to fight his grandfather and his archery teacher. But that's very different than if you went and looked for the job that paid the most to a company that you really didn't care jack S about, just because your goal in life is just to keep making money until you can retire early. Now, your swadharma can shift. You may be at a place in your life, Fang, where you decide, okay, I've done financial services. I think I'm finished with that. It's time to look at doing something new. Then we tend to have attention. So there's a fellow I'm working with, and he used to be in the telecom industry, making about $300,000 a year. And then for a whole bunch of reasons, he's gotten out of that industry. And what he's decided to do is retrain, and he wants to be a drug and alcohol counselor. Well, one of the things he's having to come to terms with is if he's making $50,000, $60,000 a year, he's not going to be able to sustain a lifestyle similar to what he had when he was making $300,000 a year. He can't have the house in Alameda and the condo in Atlanta and the big boat that's 42 feet long and the speedboat and the fancy little Porsche and the truck. And, he had all this stuff that was appropriate for someone who was making $300,000 a year. But he's finding now, I've got to make some hard choices. And I'll say to him, you can always go back into the telecom industry. I just don't want to do it. And then the question I ask is, if you were independently wealthy, what would you be doing? And that's a better question. And you will be taken care of, but you may not be able to have a rich and famous lifestyle. And you may. I don't know what you want to do. That may be really important to you. It's okay if it's really important to you. But, I don't think you're going to make 6 figures a year if you want to be a massage therapist, for example. It's probably not going to happen. Does that make any sense, Fang?
Yep, makes sense. Thanks, Jim.
But our swadharma can change for people. All right. Any other questions before we go on? Right. Next verse, please.
This is verse 16. Evam pravartitam chakram nanuvartayati hayah aghayurindriyaramo mogham partha sajivati. He who does not follow here, the wheel thus set revolving, is of a sinful life, rejoicing in the senses. He lives in vain, O son of Pritha.
So this karma chakra, this wheel of life that's set in motion, this great metaphor of the yajna, the person who doesn't live a sacrificial life, but instead has as the goal of their life only sensuous pleasure, which unfortunately is much of America. It's all about cash and prizes. It's all about status, stuff like that. Krishna says you live a vain life. In the end, it's not very satisfying. And from a spiritual standpoint, all it does is further grossify the mind. Now, in America, we don't hear about it too much anymore. We used to have the very common term, a midlife crisis. It used to hit people, around the age of 40. And if you've bought the American values, surface values, the mercantile values, money, 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 cash and prizes, rat race. We hit a point in our life and you go, what's it all about? I'm miserable. I've got all this stuff, but I'm miserable. I open up the closet and I've got 50 pairs of shoes. I've got 100 sweaters. I've been on umpty million cruises. And, for what? For what? Constantly trying to distract. And then we begin to ask the big questions. My life doesn't seem to have meaning. How can I have meaning in my life? How can I have purpose? And in the end, Krishna is saying, do you know how to have a joyful life? Live a life of service. That's the simplest thing we can do. The most painful place for the mind is paranoid self-observation. How am I doing? Am I okay? Have I achieved enough? What do they think of me? Oh, that's painful. And Krishna says, forget that small self and live a life of service. Doesn't mean you won't be successful. You can be very successful. But you'll certainly be happier. I promise you that. Any thoughts on this? All right, next verse.
Yastvatmaratirev syadatmatripshacha manava atmanyeva cha samtushta astasya karyam na vidyate. But the man who rejoices only in the self, who is satisfied with the self, who is content in the self alone, for him verily there is nothing more to be done.
So, when the mind has been purified through this selfless service, then our priorities shift. We tend to start the spiritual life because we think my worldly life isn't working, my relationships aren't working, I'm not feeling good about job, I'm screwed up with my family. Maybe I'll try meditating. I did psychotherapy for a few years and I'm doing Pilates as well. So we start thinking that the spiritual life is just another toolkit for getting on with the business of living life. And then at some point, the whole thing turns on its head. And we find the goal is the spiritual life. And the relationships and the job and the family are what Ram Dass used to call grist for the mill. This is where we work out our attachments and our aversions and stuff like that. So the woman of knowledge, when she's satisfied in the self by the self, there's a level of contentment. Well, does that mean I'm just going to sit home and bliss out in samadhi? No, probably not. There are some Mahatmas that do that. But chances are the karma of the body will impel you into some activity. We can begin to taste the deeper meaning of that old Zen saying, before enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. But everything is different. I'm no longer doing the things I do out of a place of spiritual poverty. I need this in order to be happy. I have to do that because my self-worth is dependent on it. We do them because people have asked. That's what it seems right to do. According to my skill set and my training, where I am in my station in life, that's what I'm doing. You serve. You can never tell from the outside. So my guru's guru, Swami Tapovana, lived up in the Uttarakashi, in a one-room little hut. He would only work with no more than like 2 or 3 students at a time, and they would live with him. He owned 3 kurtas. One he would wear, one was hanging on the line to dry, the other one was ready for the laundry. Now, Swami Chinmayananda, he was a Jagat Guru. Flew all over the world. Aniket Chaitanya, he had a consciousness of homelessness. Wrote over 40 books. Worked 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Never took a vacation. Died with his boots on. He was in the middle of a camp when he died. Never retired. So what's on the outside makes no difference. You don't even have to be a Swami or a Swamini. You can be a householder. You can be incognito, so no one knows that you're a woman or a man of knowledge. It's an inside job. Not every person of wisdom is a teacher. That's just another job. But if you're rooted in the self, whatever it is that you're doing, you're in the now. You're content. Your mind can easily revel in the self. And your actions, because they're not driven by ego, are perfumed and become a blessing to those around you. It's a wonderful prayer. There was a fellow named Father Michael Judge, who was the chaplain to the New York City Police Department. He was a Franciscan. He was the first recorded death at 9/11. And he had a prayer. God, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say and keep me out of your way. I just think it's a great prayer. Not at all concerned about his own agenda. When we surrender to the infinite, something much greater moves in us. Master Jesus said, I of myself do no thing. It is the Father within that doeth the work. But every one of us can partake of that. And then wherever we go, we become a blessing to the people around us. How? God, you take me where you want me to go. God, you let me meet who you want me to meet. God, you tell me what you want me to say. And for God's sake, keep me out of your way. Next verse.
Jim, where is this quote from, if I might ask?
Which quote? The one I just shared?
Yeah.
A friend of mine who read a biography of Michael Judge shared it with me.
Okay. Thank you.
I couldn't tell you, but he's an amazing fellow. He's an amazing fellow.
Thank you, Jim.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just said thank you.
Okay, next verse.
नैव तस्य कृतेर्नार्थो न कृतेनेह कश्चन न चास्य सर्वभूतेषु कश्चिदर्थव्यपाश्रयः. For him there is no interest whatever in what is done or what is not done, nor does he depend upon any being for any object.
So for that woman or man who's working from that place, there's no more concern about what has been done or what has not been done. One of my favorite stories. In the old-timey days, Swamiji used to do his yajnas, his camps, he called them yajnas, jnana yajnas, at universities. And I can't remember where this one was. It was in Northern California someplace. And the morning meditation was to be in one of the classrooms. And the janitors were supposed to have opened it. I can't remember what time, probably 6:30 or something like that. And Swamiji was a stickler for time. Meditation always started exactly on time. If you weren't in your seat by the time 6:30 arrived, the door was shut and you couldn't get in. If you showed up at the lecture late, he would just glare at you, embarrass you terribly. So he arrives and the room is not open. So he just sits down right on the sidewalk. Didn't bother him in the least. So can we work in the world, not being driven by, I guess the modern word is our triggers? Can you work at a project? Work hard. You hope it's successful, but it may not be. I think people who are in the sciences have to learn this. Because they say the vast majority of all the experiments you do in research fail. That's just the process. You may work on a deal. You're a real estate salesperson. You put all that you can into selling this house or finding a house for your client, and it doesn't work. Can you let it go? And then if it's successful, the glory is God's. Thank you, God. How can I be of service? Any thoughts on this? All right. Okay, that's all the time we have tonight. What verse did we complete, Deepa?
We finished 18.
Finished 18, so we'll do 19 next week. So we have time for questions. This is a very important and difficult subject, this whole idea of our attitude towards our work and our lives, where we are. Any thoughts, any questions?
Jim, I have a question. It's Fane again. If nobody else has a question that they want to go. Is it ever, would you ever consider a job tamasic? If, for example, the job gives you a good enough salary and a flexible enough schedule where you can spend a lot of time doing sadhana, which is maybe what you want to do, but you still have to pay the bills. But maybe it's not a job where you're fully into it, but it's just is a nice way to pay the bills and focus on your sadhana because it gives you that flexibility in your schedule to do that.
Excellent question.
Because that's not really selfless as we're serving others necessarily, right?
Well, my experience is usually if the work itself is tamasic and you're doing it because it has a good salary so you can do sadhana, chances are the tamas is going to bleed over into other parts of your life. And vegging out and watching Netflix is not sadhana. So jobs in and of themselves are not tamasic. It is we who are tamasic. Let me say that again. Jobs in and of themselves are not tamasic. It is we who are tamasic. Let me give you a very real example. The Safeway that used to be over on Pleasant Valley, great big huge Safeway. I haven't been there in several years. They used to hire people who were mentally challenged because there was a home nearby. And these people were not cashiers. They were stock people and baggers. And the joy with which these people did their work. And they were so eager to please the customers. So it was a kind of job that someone could have said, this is a crappy job. Here I am, I'm a stock person at Safeway, you know. And then someone else was absolutely thrilled to have the job. Now, the paradox, which of the two had the more sattvic mind, even though they may have been mentally disabled? That's an interesting question. So if it's a boring tamasic job, you know, it isn't the job again. Let me give you another real life example. So my accompanist, my principal accompanist, when I had my church job, this gal named Irene, incredible pianist. Now, one of the things that was always a big problem was getting the filing done. So there was all this music, and after we'd done a service, it had to go back in the files had to go back in the filing cabinets. And many a time between services, I'd be going in and out of the office, and there would be Irene in the back doing filing. And I would say, Irene, you don't need to do that. We don't pay you to file. We'll get one of the ladies in the choir to do it. And she says, oh, no, I don't mind. I like to file. It relaxes me. That is so strange to my mind. Is that making sense? That would be very Tomasic to me. But she loved it. Highly skilled pianist, and she liked to file. So again, it's the attitude that we have. Now, many of us do not have the freedom right away to leave a job. We may have a family, we may have responsibilities, we may have a lot of financial commitments and things like that. So as well as doing what we love, part of what we have to also do is learn to love what we're doing. So what is it about the job that's disaffecting? How can you find ways? Frequently, if they're repetitive tasks that in and of themselves aren't creative, where the great joy can be is the relationships at work. I've known people, for example, in the food industry, and they love the job they have. They're servers, cooks, but it's about the family that gets created, the customers that they love. Is this helpful, Fang?
Yes, Jim, it's helpful. Thank you.
Now, we also don't want to get stuck in the idea, what's wrong with my life is I haven't found my swadharma, I'm unhappy. If I find the right job, that's going to fix everything, and then I'll be blissful for the rest of eternity. That's romance. That's romance. The vast majority of us are going to find a job, and hopefully we're able to find a job where we're doing something of value for the society. But again, it's not so much about making sure we find what we love. We want to work toward that. But we want to learn to love what we're doing as well.
Jim, this is Rajni. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Hariom. Hi, how are you? I wanted to better understand the example that you gave earlier about someone who wasn't attending Swami Chinmayananda's lectures on time. So are you saying that the reaction that the individual had, knowing that they were late, they were fine to adjust because they were devoted to listen, and that was okay?
No. I was pointing out Swamiji. So he had these standards. But if he couldn't get into the meditation room on time, he just dropped it.
Swamiji. Okay, thank you.
It was Swamiji I was talking about, not the person.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
but no, that's okay. But in that sense that he would just drop it, it just for who he is, if he didn't keep working at it to be dedicated, to be more vigilant, to, improve, isn't he doing a disservice by just letting it go and moving on? Does that make any
I
sense?
don't know if he spoke to the university staff later or not. But what kind of work do you do, for example?
I'm a civil engineer. I work for government.
Okay. So have you ever worked on a project and something you worked really hard on and oops, it didn't work?
Yes.
Yeah. I think every engineer faces something like that. Now, blame and recrimination really doesn't fix things. Going home, beating yourself up doesn't really help. What yoga would say is be solution oriented. How do you solve the problem? So you let go of your attachment to the outcome. Now, it's not about you and me. Let's solve the problem. Does that make it a little clearer?
Yes. I mean, and kind of taking that, I do reflect on my actions and and making sure that I improve.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We should all do that. And if something doesn't work, we should do, an after action analysis. But that doesn't mean we get attached to the result, all upset because it didn't work out, or go into blame. Well, it's because of you. It's because of you. I mean, that happens all the time in corporate things that I've seen, where if something messes up, is who's going to end up, getting blamed for it. And I always say, be solution oriented. Don't be blame or punishment oriented. It doesn't accomplish anything.
Thank you.
I
Hello?
had a follow-up question. It's Divya again.
Hi,
Hope you don't
Divya
mind.
again.
I'm curious. I like the idea of just dropping it. Where does the balance lie, if there is a balance at all, where you might feel like the environment you're in or the people you're around are negative or have a negative energy? How do you set boundaries, or do you just not and express love as much as you can?
Very good question. First thing, quit participating in the negativity. And what many of us have a hard time admitting to ourselves is we gossip just as badly in the lunchroom. And we're just as guilty of character assassination online and stuff like that. Oh, did you see what he did in the meeting? Blah, 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 So we are part of the negativity. Does that make sense? So the first thing we have to do is we do not participate in gossip, in character assassination. I love the Buddhist injunctions around right speech. Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it timely? Is it truthful? And if it doesn't fit in those four, especially in the workplace, don't say it. And don't talk about people who aren't in the room. Major, major lesson to learn in the business world. Now, if there is an HR issue and it's your job to discuss the performance of another person, that's a little bit different issue. That's part of your job. But that's not where we get in trouble. That's not where the negativity comes from. Now, what I think you might find, Divya, is if you don't participate in it, you will find that an aura will be created around you. and that stuff won't come to you. So try it and see. Is that useful?
Yes, thank you.
But it never does any good to blame other people or think the problem is outside. You know, there's a slogan that I love. You spot it, you got it. Chances are, if I'm disturbed by the negativity of others, I may have some participation in it. And they can't make me say negative things.
Jim, could I follow up on that? This is Fane again.
All right, I want to sit, so we've got a minute.
Okay, well, I just want to follow up with a question on this, which is, I think gossip, obviously, in general, is not a good thing. But what if, for example, you're trying to warn somebody about something, asking if you had to be honest with somebody. Let's say somebody asks you for whether or not they should go into a business relationship with someone that you know who maybe has done certain things that were not good for other people they've been in business relationships with. Shouldn't you also be truthful and tell them the truth about
Is
someone?
this a love affair or a work relationship?
Work-related stuff.
By and large, I think I can only share with you what I would do.
Okay.
By and large, if I can't say anything nice about someone, I don't say anything at all. Now, there are once in a while some exceptions.
Okay.
But I think if you've been in the corporate world at all, you'll find that if you think you're saying a negative thing about someone and it's going to be a secret, forget it. It will come back, they will find out, and they'll know you said it. There are no secrets. So don't say anything to someone about a coworker or another person that you don't want them to know, and you don't want them to know that you said it.
Right. I guess I meant more like if you were trying to protect someone from.
It's not your job to protect people.
Okay.
It's not your job. Your job's to love them.
Okay.
There's a difference. We think that we have a lot more power and we have a lot more responsibility to fix people, to protect people. No, we're not that powerful.
Okay.
People are going to do what they're going to do. You can talk about your own experience.
Right.
So let's say you work for manager A, or did 5 years ago, and someone says, I've been offered a position working for manager A. I know you worked for him. You could say something like, well, I found it a challenge working for him. But that's very different than saying, he's a jerk, he does that, he did this, blah, blah, blah. You own your own stuff always. Use I statements.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Jim.
Anybody else have skillful means that they can pass on that subject? Now, sometimes I think we do need to speak truth to power. I had a boss who was unethical and dishonest, and he was a priest. So I not only, the first person I told about that was him. Father so-and-so, I think that's unethical. Father so-and-so, that's unjust. Now, being a yogi, I could care less if you fired me. which made him very weirded out because he could not manage me through intimidation, which is what he was used to doing. Sometimes it's important to speak truth to power, but that's very different than going to a coworker and saying, boss so-and-so is unethical, dishonest, and he's screwing these people. You know, go to the boss, go to the guy who you disagree with, and tell him the truth. And if you're a real yogi, you see, you'll be willing to take whatever repercussions come. All right, let's sit.